Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Dorr. I work with ISA, the International Studies Association, as their Director of Professional Development. I am here with Devin Cantwell Chavez. She is based at the University of Ottawa, and she is going to take you through creating an academic website today. Just a few guidelines for today. You can put your feedback questions in the webinar chat. You can raise your hand or you can put it in the Q&A. The webinar is being recorded, so just something to be aware of. And I think that's about it. So I will turn it over to you, Devin.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Really happy to be here today. And excited to see that so many folks are excited about talking about creating an academic website. I chuckled a little bit about the last comment in the the chat about the last time folks trying to build a website. It was 1995 and we had to learn how to HTML script it. I'm a millennial. I grew up in the era of like Zanga. I don't know if anybody remembers that platform, but I learned a lot of HTML coding and CSS to try to personalize my Zynga site. So I guess it's serendipitous that now I've become pretty passionate about folks creating their own personal websites. So we'll get into the session in a minute, but I want to kind of preface the session today by giving you a quick agenda of what we're going to do. So we'll start out with an introduction, then go into kind of key features that you would see on a lot of academic websites. We'll go through these in kind of the order of like, what's kind of the most important to have on there to, oh, these are, nice little other bells and whistles or personalizations. We'll talk about choosing a platform. Also going to talk a bit about web accessibility, and then we'll talk about what and like the part 2 opportunity here and close out. So couple like quick things. So one, I am naturally just a quick talker. So one of the hopes I have in, having the captioning availability and the recording is that if I am going a bit too fast for folks, please do feel free to go back and rewatch those things or look at the full transcript if you missed some words, because I was going through things quite quickly. And then the only other thing I would say too is I'll have my contact information. And so please do feel free to reach out with other questions that you have. We will have time for a Q&A at the end. I'm planning to go probably about 50 minutes to an hour on the actual presentation part of it, and then reserve about 30 to 40 minutes for discussion and Q&A. And I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as we go here too. If there's a good place I see to fold in questions, I will try to do that. Otherwise, don't worry about it too much. Otherwise I'll catch them in the Q&A at the end, sorry. Okay, so we're gonna actually start out with like a little quick activity. I want you to kind of pretend and role play that I reached out to you just about like some maybe random opportunity academically. All you have right now is really just like my name and maybe my picture because of the little like icon on the email. And I want you to just kind of quickly think, like, what would you want to know about me? When you get contacted, what would you want to know about somebody else in the world of academia contacting you? And I have a little whole EV set up here. I will put the link to this in the chat. So you can either put your answer in the chat or you can put them up here and they'll appear on the screen. And let's give everybody about 2 minutes to think about a couple of things that you might want to find out or know about me. Okay, recent publications, research interests, institutional affiliation, professional contact information more detailed, past experience, publication history, academic background. Recent CV. Current and active research projects. Research interest, affiliation, publications. Maybe a little bit about me outside of academia. Grants and awards. Affiliation, working pubs. Do I do consultation? Am I available for media contact? Do I have a lab? And if so, the instrumentation details. Where do I work? Where have I worked? Where did I go to school? If we might share any mutual colleagues, work outside of academia, affiliation. Yeah, these are good things. Okay, so what I'm gonna have us do is certifications if relevant. I'm gonna have us actually explore this a little bit using my own academic website here. So you all generated a list of things that you might want to know about me, and I want to see so whatever those one or two things are that you're wondering. I dropped the link for my website in the chat. There's also a QR code here, or you can type it out, any of those options. And I want you to actually go to the website and see what information you can find in the websites. And as you find the answer, you can, oh, I should have made a poll for this, but we're going to do this. You can go to this slides link here, or you can just drop the answer in the chat. So as you find kind of different information, you could either copy paste or you could summarize. But let's see. So a couple of the things that we talked about, like, affiliations, what grants or research was I on, what labs have been, do I have a lab? What do I focus on here? Yep, easy to download CV. Quick ability to open an email to me. I'm sure somebody's found my affiliation by this point, at least. Yep. Current status, grad student. Yep. Found the writing outside of academia, public scholarship. Yep. Academic interest in highlighting important awards. Impressive teaching resources, which I wasn't looking for, but maybe you want to collaborate with you. Thank you. I did work hard on the teaching resources tabs this past semester. I did a bunch of updates. Pictures are nice, can be double-edged sword for minority groups. Yeah, so we are definitely going to talk about some of the double-edgedness of this, and especially as we get to putting more information on your website, what this means for things like your digital footprint, and also what this means when we talk about intersectionalities of researchers' identities, as well as the type of work that you do, right? Somebody says, nice to see experience in megacities. Yeah, I love working in the city space. If anybody ever wants to talk about cities, definitely reach out. It's one of my passions. Okay, so I think this is a good place where I can kind of segue and pivot here. So one of the reasons that I had you all go through and look at the website, and I'll just pull it up really quick here for folks that are going to be watching this video later. So and I'll just kind of show a couple of things that folks had pointed out in the tabs here. So when you go to my website, you can see a couple of things. I'm always curious, actually, I haven't looked at the phone version of my website in a minute. So I'm, well, one thing, you know, it's always good to also check kind of your website on your phone and your desktop versions. They do sometimes look a little bit different, and you might want to make different changes to layouts and things like that based on it. So a couple things that'll stand out. One, I have some sort of reminder of like who I am at the top of my website. So that way it's easy for folks to, you know, be able to, you know, be reminded of name and kind of the name recall piece. I have a contact me and a CV like right there. So it's really easy if folks are looking to, you know, maybe they run across a tweet of mine or we run across each other at a conference. Very easy for them to kind of pull up that information once they look at my name. I give a quick kind of highlight of you know, here's the big stuff that I've done. I put like kind of my important awards, as folks had mentioned, like Fulbright, Korea Foundation, right at the top there. You can see where I'm affiliated at. You know that I'm a PhD candidate. And I've put some pictures. These are mostly pictures active from fieldwork. Some of these are conference presentation pictures with collaborators. There's an About Me tab where you can learn a little bit more. To kind of getting to the question that somebody else had about, you know, okay, what have you done outside of academia? I've got a little bit about some of my background here. Somebody else had pointed out the mentoring tab. So I've included like my mentoring philosophy and framework, some pullout quotes from mentees that I've worked with. And then the teaching resources. So I've got like sample activities, sample syllabi. I have, you know, like a YouTube playlist where I've recorded some lectures for folks to access. I will probably also put like a reference to this workshop here and like the slides that I'm presenting here on my website after as well. And then I have a research tab where you can read, you know, chapters, articles, whatnot. I have, I currently am not like running my like lab right now. I had some funding a couple of years ago. So I had lab and then folks that I have all of my former researchers here and public scholarship. I have copies of, you know, the podcasts or the posts or things like that. So I'd say that my website is probably like a kind of middle of the road website in that I do have a lot of kind of basic information there. I also have it kind of up a level, but I also don't have maybe as personalized of a website, if that and we'll look at some examples of what I mean by like a highly personalized website where we're kind of including a lot of stuff outside of what I do professionally. But what we're about to move into is kind of talking about key features here. And so I'm going to start with basically like, if you needed a website 30 minutes from now, this is the main thing you'd need to have on it. And you could like call it a day, right? Like you could leave today's workshop. If you have this one thing on there, that's like a good enough place to start. I think one of the things that when I talk to early career researchers, one of the biggest things that often prevent people from getting a website going, well, actually, there's two things typically. The first is it's one of those types of tasks that always gets kind of pushed to tomorrow. So it's a task that folks are like, I know I need to make a website. It's a lot of work. Like I want to do all of these things. I have to do all these things on it. And I don't have time to do it today. So I need to wait till I have, you know, this 8-hour block of time and I can sit down and make my whole website. I'd encourage folks to kind of move from the mindset as we go through this workshop today, from I need to make the perfect website today to I need to make a start to a website today. So I want to challenge folks, if you don't have a personal website right now and you want to have one, and we're going to kind of talk throughout this conversation today about maybe instances where you may not want to have one. If you want to have a website, I'd encourage you to kind of start at these basic levels that we're going to start with in the key features, and then you can gradually add things over time. So for instance, when I first created my website, I think I had the About Me tab, a teaching resources tab, and I think a research tab. And then I've created over time the mentoring, lab, and public scholarship tabs. I do kind of periodic updates to my website. I think the last one I did was like a few months ago. And you don't need to, kind of build Rome in a day, right? So I want folks to, I do not want you to feel like you have to make everything perfect from the very first get-go of your website. It's okay to just have a base landing pad, and then build it over time as you decide what you are and are not comfortable with having out in the public. And yeah, so the first thing, I would say at the basic minimum, that's really good and important to have is just an About Me page. So there are a range of ways that you can build your About Me page, and a variety of information that you can include there. I should also make a quick note too, all the website examples that are part of this presentation, folks like volunteered to have this shared in the presentations here, so I didn't go and just pull people's like random websites. I am very grateful to everybody that's volunteered to have their website featured on here and in the resource guide I'll share at the end of the presentation today, because I think seeing actual live examples of things is really helpful for figuring out what's going to match best with you and your intentions of having a personal website. So in the examples here, I'll kind of just point out kind of a few different ways that they've set these up. So the example on the left here, we've got a nice little introduction here, where we can see, where this person, like what stage this person's at, where they're affiliated at. They have links to the labs and projects that they're affiliated with, so that you can go and check out what those projects are about. And they also have their research goals, right? So I get a really clear sense of what type of research is this person like really focused and centralized on, and what their dissertation project was about, right? The other thing you'll notice too is that they have their NYU site linked and hyperlinked here, as well as their like Harris School of Public Policy site linked here. So they were able to kind of cross-reference, right? One quick note that I'll make is often something I often hear from early career researchers as well, especially in maybe like more resource programs, is, oh, my department has, a page for graduate students that they maintain. Why do I also need a personal website? So a couple things on this. One is that, and this also applies to your personal websites, but to a lesser degree to some extent. Your institutional website is going to oftentimes be a lot more limited in what they can put on there, in what type of information they're able to share on that on the like university or institutional website. A lot of this is practical, highly personalizing everybody's faculty web pages, especially if you have an administrator that has to go in and do that for people, can oftentimes be challenging. Additionally, universities are also usually trying to maintain some sort of brand consistency. So they'll try to keep the same fonts, the same colors. They'll try to keep everything pretty uniform so that it feels like a unified brand as you're going through the different faculty pages. And if that is not your vibe as a person or a researcher, you're going to get caught up with the institutional branding, right? The other aspect as well, that can be challenging about institutional websites, is that they're oftentimes not as frequently maintained. So for instance, most faculty websites or most grad student websites have, they might periodically update every quarter or every semester. But for instance, if you publish, let's say you publish a chapter, and you update your CV, there might be departments that update those things right away if you email your admin. It's more than likely though, if you're having to kind of go through another person at your institution, that they're not going to be able to update those things right away. Which when we're talking about a variety of ways that you might use a website, could be challenging. So one of the other things that I really like, and I actually implemented this a bit on my website, is kind of showing pictures, either something that's like relevant to kind of your identity or yourself, or relevant to, in my case, like field work. So I have pictures of myself in fieldwork sites. It kind of gives people like a visual cue of like, oh, I do work in Seoul as well, or I'm from Seoul. And so sometimes that's a nice thing to kind of add in as part of your About Me page. Um, this middle example too also has a nice like kind of byline in it in which she's talking about, you know, political scientist, researcher, and writer from India. So she's also kind of tying in identity as part of this. And so some folks may want to, they might not want to introduce themselves as like PhD candidate from University of Ottawa, right? Um, Instead, they may want to talk a little bit more about, um, where they're coming from, or they may want to, the first sentence they say about their identity, they might want to be a little different, right? So it's also another nice use of the About Me page. So, sorry, I'm just chuckling because somebody in the comments had mentioned that they've been trying to get their updated CV on their website, and it has their CV from 2017 on there still. So, so again, yeah, not every department is going to have the resources to keep those things like regularly maintained, and so you're able to have a little bit more control when doing your own website. And then this third example here, I chose this one for a couple of reasons. One, this is actually an example of an MA student who has a website. Another thing that I often hear from early career researchers is like, oh, well, I don't have publications yet, or like, I don't think I'm far enough along to have, an academic website. Or I even saw in some of the registrations for this, they don't want to come off as like being flashy, right? And one thing that I'll say is I don't think that there's anything flashy necessarily about having a quick page that gives a bit of information. I'll give a personal anecdote from doing some of my own work. So I do field research in 4 different countries, and I do a lot of international collaborations. Oftentimes when I'm reaching out to people, they have no idea who I am. I'm just a PhD candidate. Like, there's no reason to assume that people know who I am, right? And while they can look me up on things like LinkedIn, if they have a LinkedIn site, or they can look me up on Twitter if they have a Twitter page, right? I oftentimes, almost immediately after I'll reach out to somebody to interview or to collaborate, I'll see a hit on my website. So you can, depending on which website service you end up setting up with, that's the setup for kind of the next part of this. You can actually track like your web traffic and see, based on the IP address, roughly where people are kind of checking your website from. And I'll say that it's actually been really helpful. I've had folks that I've reached out for interviews say like, oh yeah, like sometimes I don't respond to these things. So I don't really know who's reaching out. I don't really know what their agenda is. But I was able to like look at your website and I have a good, I have a sense of like what you're doing is aligned to the work that we're doing. So yeah, I'll take an interview with you. Right. And so that can be really beneficial in that way. I will say also on the flip side of this, and we'll talk the next slides, we're going to talk about kind of posting your CVs on the website. The flip side of this is you want to think about in your About Me what you are comfortable having in kind of the front page of the web, right? So for instance, if you are studying contentious topics, if you are, a woman of color, if you're somebody that's, lives in or works in kind of an authoritarian context, perhaps maybe, you probably want to be a little bit more careful about what you're putting out there. And my best advice to this would be talking to other scholars who either have similar positionality to you or who work in similar research contexts. So for example, in my case, I work on climate and the environment. It's not a terribly contentious topic. In the context that I work in, I have 2-ish research sites that are semi-authoritarian. So you do have to be a little bit careful with stuff, but I genuinely feel pretty comfortable given my positionality coming from Western institutions, being sponsored by Western research, by having that up there and transparent. Additionally, by having that up there and transparent, I think it also makes it easier for interview context to kind of gauge whether they feel comfortable engaging in research interviews and whether they feel risk with that, right? So it's also, I see it as part of research transparency to kind of put my stuff out there. That being said, You know, I have Black women colleagues who study, you know, racial ethnic politics in the US right now, who do not feel comfortable having any of that info up, right? And who are dealing with like targeted public harassment. And so I think your mileage really does vary on this stuff, and you do have to consider the context of your research and your positionality right now as a political scientist. And I'm speaking, I know there's probably folks that are maybe not explicitly political scientists in here. I'm speaking more in a political science context here, but kind of a good thing for everybody to keep in mind as you're creating these sites. So this brings us to CVs, right? So one of the other really useful things to have on your page, I'd say, like, if you were going to get a website off the ground in the next hour, have a quick about me blurb, decide what you're comfortable having in there as your public headline. And then also having a link to your CV. People will oftentimes have multiple versions of their CVs. So this doesn't necessarily have to have everything on there. If there are things that you're maybe not comfortable having out into the public as a CV, don't put them on there. You can make a different version of your CV. But it is helpful to have a version of your CV where people can get a sense of, okay, where are you at in your program or your professional career? You know, what publications or grants have you worked on? What experience do you have teaching different courses? So folks will set this up in kind of different ways. So this example that I have here, they have their CV set up similar to how I have mine, where you have to click it and download it. So there's some advantages and disadvantages to this click and download approach. One of the advantages is when you have to click to download, it does reduce like the likelihood that your info gets scraped up by bots that are like crawling sites. You'll also notice too, you might have noticed on my site, I don't have my email address listed out with the actual @ symbol on it. I have it like spelled out. Again, that also kind of slows down or makes it harder for web crawlers to pull that information. So those are considerations that you may want to have if you don't want to get like a lot of spam, or you don't want your stuff to get rolled up into like AI data training sets. So the downside of this though is if you have to download the CV, people can pull it up on their phones. It's a few more steps. So people who are less tech savvy, like maybe senior researchers or folks that just have like less technological proficiency, they may not be able to pull that up as well. Oh, great question. Somebody asked, is it useful to post a CV in different languages, not only English? Yeah, I have never thought of that. And this is making me think I should probably post my CV in other languages as well. I do think if you're doing research in, so if you're either like working in a context that is not English speaking or doing research in a non English speaking context, I don't think it hurts to have things in multiple languages. So for example, I've seen folks who do a lot of work in like Mexico. They will have their website. They'll actually have a Spanish and an English version of their website. And I think they also have a Spanish and English version of their CVs. And so that's a great question and something to consider as well as you're thinking about like why personally for me would an academic website be useful? If you know that you think it would be useful for kind of building relationships abroad or outside of like a English speaking context, you may want to put more materials in whatever that other target language is. Another way that folks have set up their CVs is to kind of have, I'll call it like liquid IVs or liquid CVs. Sorry, not liquid IVs. So on the left here, this is like embedded into somebody's website. It looks really nice. It was like pretty phone compatible. You can actually scroll and kind of see all their stuff. It's again, it looks really nice. What's tricky about this is if I wanted to like download somebody's CV and maybe send it to somebody, you know, to be like, oh, we should collaborate with this person or whatnot. It's harder to do that. I could send them the link to this page, but there's not really anything like substantive there, right? It doesn't exist in some sort of other copy. And so could be tricky if I wanted to be able to share that information. But if I just want to like people to quickly reference info, this is a good option for this and it looks nice. On the right side is kind of a similar setup for this. And This one's more set up like a resume type of context. So it has, you know, kind of the little tagline on it. And then it has, you know, again, it's got the setup over similar to the left here. I believe the one on the right is a GitHub site. And we'll talk about GitHub as one of the possible options for websites. But again, you know, it looks pretty nice. You can kind of pretty easily see what the education experience is when they were doing this. I think you can also like click to expand or hyperlink out into other things. So this is also another advantage too if you do your CV this way and you want to have hyperlinks out to, you know, for example, if you're working on a project and you have a data set associated with it, you know, you can link the data set. You can also hyperlink those things in the documents that you have. But again, if you want people to kind of interact with your CV a bit more, this is, you know, kind of an interesting way to do it. Additionally, you know, again, dependent on how you set up your website, if you set it up the way that it is on like the right, for example, you would actually be able to track how many people clicked certain links on that CV. So you'd get an idea of like maybe what people are kind of going and looking for in your CV, which might be useful information to you if you're doing like consulting or you're doing, you know, you're looking for stuff on the like, you know, all act job market or something like that, right? So, you know, those are some considerations to that regard. Um, Another popular way that folks have done this is to actually have their CV embedded as kind of a link. So embedded on the site with the option to download. Some advantages to this. One is that, you know, if you do one where people have to actually download the site or you build it into the site, updating your CV then kind of becomes a little bit of a headache because you have to upload a new PDF and then hope that like the links for those are going to slightly change. So if you've, for example, shared the link to your CV in an application or something, that link has maybe now gone dead depending on how your website's set up. The other kind of disadvantage to it too is that sometimes, depending on the site that you use, it's sometimes you can kind of miss that you haven't updated your CV. So for example, right now, because on the way that I've got my site set up on here, I'm actually not super sure. I need to check the date that I've got my CV set up. And so it's kind of easy to maybe forget to update your CV if you do that. For the examples that I gave here, updating this is going to be kind of a pain because not only do you have to update like your Word or PDF doc version of your CV, but you also have to like manually update it in the website. So that keep that in mind if you go this route, that your upkeep on this might be a little bit more difficult. What's nice about the embedded ones though is that when you do the new document, one, it would be really easy to see as soon as you go to your website whether that is the most recent version of your CV or not, because you know you can tell. I'd also recommend probably you can see a little bit here that this person has like they have a July in the title of the file. Um, do be aware of like what your file downloads as if you have a downloadable version. Um, I would recommend having something like last name CV, and then like maybe the date of the CV, so that you know one that you know what version of the CV it is, but also you know if folks are coming and downloading your CV, like they when it's on their computer, they know like what it is and it's not just like a random smattering of letters and numbers. On the other side too, if you use like humorous names to name your documents, you know, just make sure you've changed that before you put it on your website. Unless that's your vibe that you're going for, that you want people to see humorous file names. But, you know, I'd imagine most people probably want to have a professional type of image there. Some folks will also do this. I don't think I have I don't have an example here, but one other way that you can do this too is doing this as like a Google Doc. So I've seen more and more people keeping their CV on there as a Google Doc, which is nice because you never have to update the link and you never have to upload a new file. Downside for Google Docs, of course, is that sometimes, you know, when you're downloading it as a PDF or whatnot, the formatting can be so-so. And also that Google Docs, again, if you're thinking about this kind of a like web privacy, AI scraping concern perspective, just know that Google Docs, that stuff is going to be a little more susceptible to that as well. And the same issue too here if you put your info directly on here. Okay, so we've talked about me page, CV. Next thing is like research pages. So these are a couple of examples of research pages of the recent Dr. Conkins and Willis. And so a couple of things, there's a lot of ways that you can approach the research piece of this. So some folks will have like their job market paper on there, for example. One change that I've made to my website actually from like preparing all of these presentations is I've now started to put the like the short abstract of what the paper is along with the title. I think I used to just have the title and the link were available. I will make a quick note here as well when we talk about the research. So couple of things to keep in mind if you're posting links of your research. One is depending on where you have published, I think all the stuff I have on my site right now is like open access to some extent, but depending on where you've published, if you post a link to your publication, you could get into some copyright trouble with the publisher. So make sure you understand like what is kosher and not to post, because you don't want to get in legal trouble for like accidentally posting, you're breaking copyright law because you've posted something you've published and like the publisher doesn't like that, right? So make sure you understand what you're okay to and to publish or to not publish. Similarly, some universities are going to be a little bit more picky. Like if your research was funded by a grant that the university manages, make sure you understand like your university and grant policies. Oftentimes you can talk to your grants administration office about this. On the flip side of it too, ironically, sometimes if you have federal grants, some federal grants may require you to publish your stuff open access and may actually want or encourage you to to put that stuff, into public domain, public websites. So just know what the kind of conditions are of your university, your grant, and all of that. And you can also talk to university communications as well, if depending on the institution you're at. So just make sure you're kind of aware of like all of the things that could potentially govern this. But yeah, just as an FYI. The other aspect of this too, so sometimes, so let's say you can't post the actual link to the paper, you could just post like the title of the article and like the abstract or whatnot, just so folks know what you're kind of working on. I've seen also folks do like bullet point summaries or like a 1 or 2 line summary of what the paper is about, to give people just kind of a quick teaser of what they're working on. You also don't necessarily have to wait until you have a published thing to put things into your research section, right? So for instance, you could put, again, like working papers on there. You could do, you could even just put a summary of like projects you're working on. So for instance, this example on the right-hand side here, this is a picture from some ongoing field work that was happening for this researcher at the time. And they were mentioning like, oh, yep, so I'm doing field work here, working on this topic. And it just gave folks a sense of like, okay, this is kind of generally what they're working on. So it does not need to be, super fancy formal stuff that you have in the research section here. It can be, there's a lot of room and a lot of broadness that you can kind of work in here to showcase what it is that you actually like work on and do. Here's a couple of other examples. So the example on the left here is, they've got some of their recent publications, and they've also got their under review section here. At the top here, we have a kind of summary of like the general types of stuff that they work on, which I think is really helpful if you're trying to figure out if you want to collaborate with somebody or if, because sometimes also to like what you've recently published or things that you're maybe recently working on might not be like your actual research identity, right? So especially in places where those things might be less aligned, you could kind of highlight your general interest of stuff. Yeah. Ooh, good question about the under review piece. So I'd say the under review piece is a little tricky for a couple of reasons. One, depending on the norms of the types of stuff that you're publishing in, you might be already kind of expected to do what's called a preprint. under like the open science frameworks. So for example, a lot of like quantitative scholars who do like experimental models and things like that, they've already probably actually circulated drafts of these things for more public comment and scrutiny before submitting it for peer review. Some journals have updated their policies to adjust to this norm, and some have not. So this is one of those things, again, if you know that you work in a particular research context, it's good to chat with, collaborate, like other people who are also publishing similar research to get a feel for the publishing norms. Maybe take a look at their website and to see, okay, what are other people who are publishing similar things or doing similar projects to me? What do their websites look like? And what are they sharing? What are they not sharing? Right. I'll say, as a like more interpretive researcher, I think the norm is kind of like 6 of one, half a dozen of another. So I've seen some folks that will put the titles of what they're working on or what's under review, and maybe even the places that it's under review or getting R&R at. Other folks will not put that information public. I'd say that the norms kind of like it changes depending on what you're working on. I wish I had a more streamlined answer for it, but it's it's kind of it depends answer. Theoretically, if you're reviewing a manuscript, you shouldn't be going hunting for somebody's like manuscript. Like when I review people's pieces, I don't go searching for the titles. Theoretically, you could probably find folks' stuff if you do that. But on the other hand, especially if you're like if you're applying for jobs that are, more academic based, or you're trying to kind of show stuff that you're working on. And especially for like on the early career side, it's likely you don't have a lot of stuff that is like actually out and published yet. It's likely a lot of your stuff is either working papers or under review. So it can be kind of a tricky, thing to like navigate there. And I'd say the best thing to do is just looking at other people who publish similar stuff. It's a good question though. This example on the right hand side too is one example I had mentioned about, so they're talking about an ongoing project here. And they gave kind of quick bullet points of like what they're actually studying, exploring in that study. So that's also kind of another way to handle this as well. If you don't want to, if you want to give people a sense of what you're working on, but maybe you don't want your title to be easily searchable if it's under review and you feel kind of awkward about navigating that norm right now, what you could do is kind of give a sentence that summarizes the project, some bullet points of like stuff you're working on with it, but just not using the actual title of the piece. And then you could put in parentheses like under review next to it or something like that. So there's a few ways to navigate it, but I would definitely just, I'd look towards people who are doing similar work to you and see what kind of the norm is there. So it's also one of the reasons too that like you don't need to do all of this on the first go around with the website, right? So you don't need to have all of the stuff figured out to get your website going. You can do the stuff that you're comfortable with and then kind of look around, do some research, ask folks as you're looking to add some other stuff to your site. Public scholarship is also another thing that's pretty popular for people to feature on their website. Again, same kind of caveats here. Some news media outlets get really, particular about whether they want those links posted or not. In this case, it's probably like okay and fine. So in the public scholarship sections here, we've got lots of different links to like articles and op-eds that folks have done, or like interviews that they've participated on, research briefs. We have examples here. And there's a lot of different layouts you can use. So like these ones are pretty simple, especially the one on the right-hand side here. They just kind of put the name of it, the link for people to click. You can also kind of like put these over pictures, draw people in a little bit more with them. Put your link separate from the little shot. The one on the left here, I have a pretty similar setup on my website where I kind of tease like a picture to draw folks in. And then I have the titles and like links to read and whatnot. Similar over here, you know, this person has, the person on the left here has the links to either articles they've written or where they've been kind of like cited or referenced. That's another thing too, is if your research has been referenced or quoted in somewhere, you know, you might be interested in featuring that as well. And then on the right-hand side, we have some examples here of, so this person, like, because they do contracting, they don't really feel comfortable and or may contractually not be able to share stuff that they've directly written. But what they've done is put the like folks that they have written for, so folks can get an idea of, you know, oh, okay, Healthline, like I'm familiar with this. I know kind of what those articles look like and what they typically tend to publish. So that's also an option here too, if you are doing, you know, publishing where you're either contractually obligated to not share those links, or you know, maybe don't feel comfortable, or you maybe write a lot of stuff and it doesn't make sense to put all this stuff on here, right? You can just put like who you've written for before, to give people a sense of what type of writing you do. Also, and I guess this kind of segues into this question about LinkedIn here. So all the stuff that I mentioned here, these are also things that you could feature on like a LinkedIn site. I do find LinkedIn really helpful. Unfortunately, I kind of joke with folks, you know, LinkedIn is probably like my least favorite social media site to use. Unfortunately, it's super useful for stuff like interviews, for very similar reasons to why a personal website is useful. I will say, depending on like who you're working with, and what context. So I tend to contact a lot of people who work in organizations, or, you know, municipal governments or things like that. And so LinkedIn can be helpful for that because there's a norm and a culture around using that tool. Um, if you're doing kind of more like everyday politics type of stuff, LinkedIn might not be as useful of a tool for researching, connecting. And people may be more likely to find your info on like a website versus LinkedIn, but it also really depends on the context. I'd say if you have a LinkedIn page and you also have a personal website, I would definitely cross-reference those things. And you can even have like feeds that you put into your website, that the Twitter one used to work, but and I don't think they've restored that API yet, at least not for free users. But you can, I think there are some APIs that exist for other sites. I think there is one for LinkedIn that you can use. It depends. You have to play with the kind of formatting and code a little bit. But I definitely would recommend like cross-posting and things like that in the instance that you know, you're using that tool. I will say the downside to LinkedIn, if you don't have a LinkedIn profile, it does limit your ability to see some information, versus it doesn't have kind of that gatekeeping on like a, you know, a website that you're running. Teaching and mentorship is also a thing that can be really helpful to feature on here. So the example on the left here actually has, you know, so it's got their teaching philosophy, it's got some links for how they've developed their pedagogy, and even syllabi to courses that they are currently or, you know, used to teach. On the right side, this person has, you know, the course that they were the course instructor for, as well as like the description of what that course was. And one other thing I'll notice too, I didn't throw a slide in for this, but some folks will also even have a page on their website that's specifically for students who are taking their classes. And they'll like password protect those pages or whatnot. And so they might have various things there where like maybe they have a feed of article, like they'll kind of use it almost like as a learning management system. I think this is probably a less popular use for websites these days, given that most institutions have purchased stuff like, you know, Canvas or Brightspace or whatnot. But still may be useful if you want something that's not like owned or managed by the university, for students to, you know, be able to get some benefit out of. So contact information. So this is, I think, one of the biggest places to really, you really need to sit down and figure out before you put your contact information on your website, what it is, like what your boundaries with people contacting you are, and how the research that you do or your identities may impact how people interact with you. So couple different ways that you can do this. The example on the right here, we see that this person has email, I think this is an academia.edu profile, Twitter, LinkedIn, and like a WordPress like blog site. They have the ability to contact them through all of those things, with a nice little like hyperlink that will take you to all of those different platforms or email. Those are useful. And I think it's kind of like the standard way that folks tend to have kind of a contact set up, something where like they've either got their email listed or hyperlinks easily available for people to access. The other common thing that I'll see folks do, so this person has listed their email separately, or you can submit a form through their website. I would say that if you were somebody who is a bit worried about harassment on the internet, I'd say so a couple things. One is that you know, depending on the institution you're at, your like work email, for example, may be publicly available information anyway. Like, for instance, I know I believe this is like from everybody I've talked to and looking at the stuff, like for example, if you're an employee at like a University of California school, you are a public employee. Your email address, I think, has to be public information. Not your personal one, of course, but like your work email address. There's some information that based on like state or federal law might or might not be able to be redactable in the first place. So I'd say, one, if you're worried about those things, make sure you understand what your institution or like state federal policies are on those things. And I would say that I probably like if you're worried about those things, you could either not put your contact information on there, or if you want people to contact you, just make sure it's aligned to whatever is already going to be public domain or public info to begin with. I think that's probably just like the easiest thing to do on the first level of concern about this. I'll also say though that sometimes people, especially depending on what you study and your identities, you may get harassing communications from folks. I think for a lot of folks, you're going to get those dependent on whether you have a personal website or not. But you certainly don't want to make it easier for people to do that. So one thing you could do is setting up like an email contact form like this. And you can actually set it up to filter stuff automatically. So if there's certain like racial epithets or words that like are going to be particularly upsetting for you, you can like auto filter those where it'll never even make your inbox. You can also have it go to you can have it those emails go to a separate inbox that you set up just for the website, and have for example a trusted friend or colleague check that email for you. So those are a couple of things that you can do to kind of like lessen or dampen some of the concerns for harassment related to that. A couple of things I'll note too is that, like, for example, on your CV, I meant to mention that on that slide. I know kind of a more old school practice with CVs was to put like your address on there and like your cell phone number. I would strongly advise to not do that. You generally don't need your address and phone number on those things anyway. If you're applying for a job directly, you can provide those to HR when you apply for those things. I would probably not put those on the internet on a public website in 2024. And so just be mindful of what you're putting in the content information and assume that whatever you put here is like the worst person ever will have that information, right? So only put, I'd say, stuff on here that you're really comfortable with, or that is already going to be out there anyway, but would make it easier for good actors. Like, if you're wanting to get contacted, like, for example, if you want to be a public facing scholar, and you want to do like media interviews and things like that, if journalists cannot find your information easily, they're not going to contact you. They might go through faculty pages. I actually had a really interesting conversation with a journalist about a year ago. I was getting interviewed for a piece, and I was, just thanking them for, researching the topic, whatnot. And they're like, yeah, they're like, we ran across your name. We saw on this, I think it was either Twitter or the university website, you studied this topic. They're like, I was really grateful you had a personal website though, for two reasons. One, your contact information was super easy to find there, but also, they're like, we are starting to be more careful, especially with academics that we're researching or like academics that we're interviewing, because sometimes their research will get described as like working in a particular area, and we'll go to interview them and realize that they maybe are not representing, you know, like they're representing some views that we might not want to platform, for example. So that's also something to keep in mind as well, is that folks are also looking at websites to kind of like vet you in some way, especially if you're wanting to do public facing work. But if you don't want to do public facing work, then you by all means have less contact information available, right? But just keep that in mind that that's always going to be a trade-off there. Some folks have like all of their information. So this person on the right here, they have like their office hours, their location for the office hours, a link to be able to schedule meetings with them and things like that, right? They have a lot of information on here. Again, though, I think a lot of this is going to be dependent on what you research and your positionality on things. So this person works on like computing machinery. They are male presenting, they are white presenting. Like there is a lot of stuff happening here where they're probably not having to think through as many of these layers. Versus like folks that are working on more contentious topics or identities that are being targeted right now. You may want to think about these things. Not a fun thing, but just something realistic to consider here. And I don't want it to come off as if, you know, oh, everyone should, you know, I do want people to get personal websites. I think there's a lot of benefits to it, but you know, these are real considerations that folks need to think about in our times. So a couple of other ideas here. This example on the left here is actually one of the examples I was mentioning with the student portal. These are, can't remember if this one's password protected or not, but they do have kind of more specific resources or things for folks to access related to those particular courses. So folks that want, you know, folks in the course, they have like kind of more specific stuff on this website for them to access here. One advantage to also having a portal like this is, let's say you're in a postdoc or some sort of more temporary position, like a VAP position at the moment. You may be teaching courses, and you may have materials you want to use for a course. If you have those on your course websites, like those are the university's property. And even some of the stuff you share here, depending on how your university sets up instructional contracts and things like that, could still be considered university property. So just as an FYI. If you have stuff set up on your website and you want to be able to use those for future classes, probably easier to like port that stuff than if you have it set up, let's say with like Canvas, right? It could be a little bit tricky to like be like, oh shoot, like, you know, these articles were great or whatever. Whereas this kind of lives on regardless. I think the person that set this up, this is like an optional resource for students to use. They don't force them to use this, but it's there for like extra resources or info if they want it. Some people also do blogs on their sites. You know, this was really popular a few years ago. There's still a few folks that do this. I think there's like add-ons you can do for like Medium and Substack and things like that as well. WordPress is a really popular one that folks will integrate in with blogs. So if you're wanting to, especially if you maybe don't have published things out there right now, but you want to write on some topics and give folks a sense of kind of what you're working on, your thoughts. Blogs are a really great way to kind of do this in like a shorter format. Other ideas here, the person on the left, they do a lot of work with suicide. So they had like a resources page with hotlines related to suicide, as well as like books about suicide for general audiences. This is a really good thing to think about, especially if you're doing kind of more public engaged or activist type research. You may want some resources. You may want to use your platform to help promote different things or promote advocacy for things. Especially if you're doing advocacy stuff, it's very, I'd imagine in a lot of university contexts, it's kind of unlikely that the university will let you do that. If you feel really strongly about wanting to provide resources in kind of a public site related to your work, personal website might be a really good option for you, right? Some folks also will do kind of creative things on their website. So they'll have like a photography section where they'll actually, you know, like fuse what they do with like photographic work that they're doing. I don't think I have a picture of this one, but the one of my favorite websites has a section where like they have all the cakes that they've made. Um, this person on the left-hand side here talks a little bit about some of their athletic background, and some of their kind of like personal story. And they have a whole tab for the athletics that they've done, which I think is really interesting, cool. And so it gives like just a little bit more background about like who is the person, right? Which sometimes those things are hard to communicate on a website like LinkedIn or through like your university page. On the right-hand side here, this is again kind of another example where they've kind of fused together a few things, but this is their talks and workshops tab. So I think one of the questions somebody threw out at the beginning is like, oh, you know, do you do consulting or whatever? You could have a tab for consulting, or if you do, you know, kind of paid talks and workshops, you could have a tab for that. So those are also things to consider as well. And again, things that would be harder to kind of have live on a LinkedIn site or through like a university site in a lot of instances. Couple of other things to know or to keep in mind here. Know your institutional policies. So things like your university logos, like what the kind of stipulations on using those things are. You'll want to kind of chat with your university communications office or look at the university communications policies on those things. Things like pictures, for example. So like the pictures I have on my site, those are all on there with consent. I don't post pictures of other people without their consent. Make sure that you know what your university policy on those things are. And also like your regional federal policies. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. And then also like make sure you understand like your grants agreements and things like that too. Sometimes grants may have stipulations about you posting stuff publicly. So just make sure like you understand institutional policies both at like your academic institution, your whatever your provincial, state, federal governance is going to be on these things, and then also any grants. So you know, you don't want to throw things on there and then get in trouble for it later. On the whole though, typically like one of the big advantages of having a personal website is you do have a bit more freedom of speech when you're putting things on your personal website versus like going through another entity and asking them to kind of like do that promotion for you. You can have a little bit more of a driver's seat in this matter. So I want to talk about website inspiration. So choosing a platform, this is a question multiple people have asked, and I apologize. I hope you didn't think I was ignoring you here. So I'd say that choosing a platform comes down to three big things. First is price, second is ease, and the third is features, right? You are going to like, it is a delicate balance of all of these three things. Typically, the rule is things that are more pricey are usually going to have more features and be easier to use. Like similarly, things that are you know, you could also do things that have more features, but they may be less easy. So for example, you may have to code more. And you could do something with lower price, but again, you're probably going to have to be making a lot more things and have a bit more tech like familiarity to be able to navigate those. In terms of kind of a basic breakdown of things, and I will say like with a quick caveat here, this is my personal opinion of these. Folks have different price points and different experiences with these things. So you might maybe sort some of these things a little bit differently in the bottom two rows here. So stuff that's free, Google Sites, to some extent, you may have to, if you want to use like a totally free Google Sites, you know, link where you don't have like a unique server necessarily, and you've got the like .google sites, blah, blah, blah. It's totally free. I will say that I'm actually like fairly impressed by recent Google Sites. There's a lot more that you can do with it. If you know how to navigate the Google Docs, like Google Sheets type of stuff, Google Sites is not any more difficult. So if you know how to use Google tools in general, Google Sites is going to be really easy for you to get something off the ground with. If you do want to have something like devincantwell.com, you can pay like $12 a year, and they'll buy and maintain your domain space for you. GitHub is also another really good option here. You will have like, depending on how you set up your GitHub, I think you do have to pay for server space on it. I haven't set one up personally. I've just kind of toyed around with it. I think there's maybe some like free or like low cost options, but like at most, I think you end up paying $15 a year or something like that. If you are already using GitHub for other stuff, and GitHub repositories, making a GitHub website is going to be very, very easy for you. WordPress is another like pretty friendly one. There's free versions of it and there are paid versions of it. The free versions of it, you know, again, you're going to end up with like a kind of weird website name. But more or less it has like probably everything that you need on it, at least to get kind of a website started. There's also a product called Owlstown that gets used by academics. Their templates, I think, are really good for the most part. They are free to my knowledge, at least still free. There may probably be some paid add-ons and things like that, but the bulk of the service is free. And our Markdown and Quarto, I need an update for Quarto on here. Those are also like other good options to kind of make and launch your websites. Somebody put in the chat here, and I think this is a good consideration. So company IT can block .io websites as a general rule, and may also block Google Forms that have options like uploading files. So something to keep in mind on there when you're thinking about your formats for stuff. So I went with like a domain that just had like a simple.com. I don't think I've had any issues with anybody like loading my website in different places, and I've worked in some contexts where there is kind of some censorship of websites. And I don't think I've had any issues with that before. That's the other consideration too for some social media stuff, is like in some contexts, some social media is banned on some like you know, IT servers and things like that. So having a personal website is also kind of a plus there, where social media might be harder to get to without a VPN. Oh, cool. Okay, great. Good to know that my website loaded on the work VPN. In kind of the middle tier here, and I would say that this is stuff that's maybe like you're going to pay up to maybe $30 a year or something. Weebly, Wix, WordPress, Owlstown. WordPress and Owlstown, these would be like the paid versions or paid add-ons. Weebly and Wix, you end up paying like a few dollars a month. You can pay a little bit more sometimes. Like you can actually buy templates of stuff. They also have free templates. Similarly, you can also have like the .weebly.wix or whatever as part of your web address. And I think either get it for free or for less. Typically, as you're going like down this price list here, so like increasing your price, as you go through that, like the more that you're paying, typically the more personalized your site is, and the more like options you're going to have to play with stuff. But again, you know, you can still get a pretty good website off the ground with this free tier of stuff. Just you may have to put in a little bit more if you want it to like look a little more personalized. I'd say the kind of like high-end stuff here, which this can go for a non-student, I think their rates are like $175 a year or something like that. And that includes like buying your domain space, the templates, all of that. So I run my website in Squarespace. I personally, the reason I did it was because I needed to get an academic website up. I have coding knowledge. I do not have time. And so for me, it was really nice to be able to just like pay a chunk of money, which when I got my Squarespace page, I got it at a student rate, which I think was like 70 or 75 a year. It was worth it for me to just spend that, so where I didn't have to worry about having to do a whole bunch of coding every time I needed to update my website. So something to consider. Oftentimes too, like if you have, you know, so for example, my partner had a grant where he had like some professional development funds listed in the grant. He was able to use some of those professional development funds to pay for a Squarespace page. Some grants might or might not let you do that. Some university funds, you might or might not be able to use funds for that. Check with your organization because it'll vary wildly. But you know, sometimes the cheapest thing you can pay for is with cash, you know. So like if your time is highly valuable and you don't have very much of it, but you want to get a site going, it could be worth paying for one of these options if you know that you've got a little bit more time and a little bit more coding knowledge and that's not really stressful for you. The free options are really good. So yeah, so apart from Squarespace, so Weebly, Wix, were like all of these ones on here. Um, all of these are pretty like I think the only ones that you really need to know how to code would be like GitHub, the R Markdown slash Quarto, and everything else on here. If you don't code or don't have time to code, most of these sites, the templates are like drag and drop, and it's basically like editing like a Google Doc or a like a Canva ad or whatever. So for most of these, you don't need to know how to code. If you want to do fancier stuff, you may need to like they do have the option to kind of like go under the hood, if you will. But yeah. Um yeah, somebody mentioned like they like Weebly use the free version with like the no special URL. A lot of people do that, and I don't think anybody like bats an eye at that either. Um Truthfully for me it was like more of an aesthetic thing. I was like, oh, I'd like to just have my name.com on there, right? But it's not like a needed thing, and people are not going to be like, oh, they have the .weebly on there. They're folks really are not going to judge that very much if you have that. In terms of the security of the sites, I mean, I'd say that they all have their pluses and minuses to them. I don't know that there's one that's kind of a pack leader on those things. I have heard from folks that Wix is pretty good. I think for all of these, you're gonna have kind of like it's going to be like hit or miss on some things. My general advice for like the security of these websites as a whole is going to be like my general advice for digital security overall. Whatever password you use to create or modify your site, make sure the password for that is different from your password from all of your other stuff. Because if your password for your website ever gets hacked, they will also have information to all of the other things that you use that email and password combo for, right? So like don't have your bank info login be the same as your website like info login. So that's one thing. The second thing is I probably wouldn't put anything super sensitive on your personal website. So like I would never have like my transcript data or something like this living on my website because that is sensitive information. You can also set up two-factor authentication for your website. I've got it set up for mine. I think everyone should have two-factor authentication set up for any things like this, especially anything where you might be storing like a credit card payment, all of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, I'd say like make sure your password is different for the site, have two-factor authentication, don't put anything super sensitive on the website. Oh, one other thing that is also good to know, when you register your domain, federal law usually does require that you have to put your address. So you have to have like your name and address to who the site is registered to. So just know that that is a thing, that you may get prompted to put like your name and address for hosting your domain. So if you don't want to do that and you're a little worried about the privacy for that, keeping the like no special URL version, the free version of it might be better, like a better option then. So that's kind of another privacy consideration there. Better to have .com or .co.uk, for example. Yeah. No, it's a good question. So, for example, I could have put like, .org or like there's a whole bunch of other like end pieces. I think I know a lot of Canadian academics have like whatever the Canadian version of that is. I'd say like it probably doesn't matter too much. I'm sure that there's like more fancy reasons why you should do one or the other. I'd say for like the typical researcher, it doesn't really matter. I'd probably just like default to whatever the norms are for again, like I would just follow the norms for probably whoever else is doing research and has websites that you interact with. So I'd maybe go find, 510 scholars that do similar research to you, see if they have personal websites, look to see what ending they're using, and maybe choose from there. Sometimes too, when you're signing up for your domain, there may not be, um, you know, it might be that when I signed up for mine, devon.camp or devoncantwell.org was not available or whatever, right? In which case, then you can switch to like the other domain name on there. But it doesn't, I'd say for purposes of researchers, it's probably like less important. You can also, this is the other thing too. If you decide that you don't like your domain name later, you can always pay for a different one or change your domain name. So it's not like set in stone. You'll have to like, of course, update places where you've listed that website to, make sure you've got the right address on there now. But you don't have to, it's not like you pick it and like that's what you have to live with forever. So I wouldn't stress too much about it is essentially the lesson I'm trying to impart here. And if you're stressed about it, you can always start making your websites with the free version of it and then import, like you can actually import your website into a domain later down the road once you have a better sense of what you want your domain name to be. Yeah, good questions. I think I'm gonna, when I do this session for the ISA live session, I'll chat with a couple of people who have a little bit more know-how on the security end to try to get an answer to the security question. The person that asked this on here, if you want to shoot me an email, I can follow up with you when I have like more of a layout on the security aspect of this, because that is a good question, especially given the stuff that we research as political scientists. It's probably good to have an idea what the breakdown of security is between these. Okay, I want to briefly talk about accessibility. So one really good site, and I'll throw this link in the chat here, is the W3 site. So I probably have a couple things that I need to update accessibility-wise on my site. And my general caveat to accessibility is really important. You don't necessarily want to automatically exclude like a certain number of people because stuff is just like not readable or not, like it's just not accessible to certain parts of the population. I think it's typically a lot of stuff for accessibility is pretty low lift, especially when you're at the beginning stages of creating a website. This website's really good because it'll actually walk you through a lot of digital accessibility examples. I'll show you a couple here. But one thing I'll note about this though is like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. So that being said, like it is okay, like you want your website to be as accessible as possible, but if you know that you don't have capacity, for example, to like alt text all of your images right off the bat, alt text one or two and like get to the others as you can. I like in an ideal world, all websites would be perfectly accessible for all people. One issue is that like you're going to have competing like models of accessibility for stuff. So typically things are not going to be accessible for all people at all times. But also the other aspect of accessibility here is it's better to have something that is partially accessible than not accessible at all. So if you notice that there are things that like you can improve accessibility wise on your website, you like put it on like the future to-do list, and like get to it when you can get to it or ask for help where you can. But don't let like an attempt to make your website perfectly accessible keep you from like not doing any accessibility, right? So a couple of big things. You'll want to kind of think about how you actually are structuring this like the actual structure and bones of your website. They'll have some kind of they have some like good guidance here about how to do, headings and contrast ratio, how to set up that structure. They also they have some like other things here about like how to set up interaction on your site, moving, blinking, flashing content, like why that might be an accessibility issue. A couple of things that I want to highlight from some of their guidance here. One is like contrast ratio. So for example, at the top here, they have an example of like, if you have, light gray text and a white background, it's going to be hard for a lot of people to read that. On the bottom, they have some examples of what high contrast would look like on a website. So I think this is like a good thing to keep in mind because sometimes the templates that we choose from these websites to start with, they may not always have the best contrast ratio, and you don't want somebody like pulling up your website and like not being able to read what is on there. Um, one, because again, it cuts out a whole segment of people, but also it's kind of you putting like all of the hard work that you're putting on your website, it's like going to waste if people can't actually read it, right? So contrast ratios are really a good and important thing to double check on your site. Resizing text and the ability to do that is also really important. I don't know about you all, my eyes are getting old these days, and so I'm finding myself zooming in on websites a little bit more, especially on my phone. So just make sure that you've got like there's ways that you can actually like test, again, test this out on your website. Pull up your website on your phone occasionally and see like, okay, if I try to zoom in on my web browser here, like, is it going to cause this issue on the right where everything's laying on top of each other? And if so, you know, I need to probably like go and adjust some settings on my website for this. You also want to consider stuff like keyboard access and visual focus. So, people should be able to like use their keyboards to get around your site. If they can't, that means they won't be able to reach certain parts of your site if they're dependent on like keyboard navigation. And I would also just say, like, as an FYI, be careful about moving, flashing, and blinking content. They have some good guidance here about, stuff to kind of cover or check for when it comes to moving, flashing, and blinking. I know everyone loves those like image carousels on sites, but they can be really hard, especially if you can't control it to move the image. They can be really hard for folks from an accessibility point, and oftentimes will detract from the information that you're actually trying to like communicate on your site. So, a lot of these accessibility like things to look for are also things that just make your website like a better tool to communicate with people. Captions, if you have like videos or podcasts or things like that, having captions or subtitles available is good. Having like a transcript for those things if possible is good. These are all like best practices, but again, let's say you have a podcast that you want to share and make accessible to people on your website, and maybe that podcast doesn't have a transcript with it, and you don't have time to transcribe it. You can still share the transcript, or you can still share the podcast. I wouldn't not share the podcast, but just know that like without a transcript, it could be harder for people to access. You could always do things like following up with people who produce the web podcast to see if they have a transcript or could provide you one. But again, like take stuff in baby steps if you need to. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good here. Okay, so last bit, and then we can finish out with some more questions here. So I want to just take a couple of minutes. What is the takeaway or question that you still have from the workshop? I'm asking this for a couple reasons. One, we covered a lot of ground in the workshop today, and we might not have been able to get to everything. I'll put this link in the chat again too. We might not have been able to get to everything on here. And so, one thing I want to be mindful of is that there might be some stuff I can follow up with you all on resource-wise, like the security question, right? Additionally, for folks that are going to the ISA annual meeting, I'm doing this workshop again. So if you have takeaways or questions that weren't answered, those are things I can work on incorporating for that upcoming workshop, and or can follow up with a resource or whatnot. So it's helpful for me to know basically like what are big takeaways you got, like aha moments, things that, oh wow, I didn't think about this thing, or this was useful for me to know, that helps me know like what to keep in this presentation. And the questions that you have helps me figure out like, okay, where might I need to follow up with people individually, or on the whole, or make a resource for this thing. The hope is to like, we'll run this workshop probably a bunch more times and also give this to different programs, so that they can do like, local ones in their departments or whatnot. So it's also helpful to know this too, because I can tell folks like, oh yeah, don't cut this part of the presentation.
So while everybody is just putting their questions in the chat, I personally think this was very comprehensive, and I think I'm going to have more questions as I actually try and construct it myself, like when I go and try and build my website. So that's just my 2 cents. But we'll give everybody a moment to put their questions in the chat.
Ooh, I do want to address this one about tone length, how to best present yourself, basically. This is a question that we get almost every time I do this presentation. And so honestly, a lot of this is like you have to do a little bit of introspection on there. So you'll notice like the tone of my website is mostly professional. I have a couple of fun things sprinkled in there, but I keep a pretty professional tone on my website. I know other folks who, one of my favorite websites, I should ask him if I can share this like section on here, but one of my favorite websites, he actually has a section of like, he calls it like emails from fans. And it's like basically all of the like hate mail that he's gotten. He's just like kind of makes fun of them on the page. You know, obviously like that works for him, it works for his personality. I am not that bold, I probably could not do that. And similarly there's some other, you know, folks that, like I had mentioned the example of the cakes. Some people will share like their art and things like that. And this, they've done a lot of introspection about like what they're comfortable putting out to the public. My general advice to folks is like, if you're worried and you're asking this question, it probably doesn't hurt to start out on a more kind of conservative, like toned down version, and then like slowly add things in as you feel comfortable. Also, if you put something out there and you're like, ooh, actually I don't feel comfortable with this, you can always take it down. So, oh, great question about the like list of best examples. The next slide I will have a link with some website inspo for there. Common hosting platforms. Oh, yep. Ooh, the hosting platforms is a good one. There will be a recording of this. Yeah, so if you want a more step-by-step of how to create a website, there is a part 2 to this that I'll talk about. There's a form to fill out. The hope for the like structure of the series is basically kind of getting folks on the same page first about like what information you're going to even want to think about putting on there content wise, giving people an introduction to different tools that you could explore, because the step-by-step of how to create a website is going to vary dramatically depending on the tool that you're using. And then the part 2 of this, which is optional for folks, we can actually pair you up with somebody to actually do more of that step-by-step of like, oh, I want to set this up on GitHub. I have my stuff ready to go. Can you help me like figure out how to get these pages set up? Yeah. Code a website. Yeah, so it kind of depends. It depends what, honestly, I would pick your platform first, because for some platforms, you may not actually need to do a lot of coding for it. And for some stuff, like if you build your website on R, like, or using R, like you really just need to know R for that, right? You don't need to know as much like HTML, CSS for that. Okay. Just seeing if there's any other questions here. Yep. So part 2, let me move to the next slide here. Okay, so I'm going to drop a form here, and I'm going to drop the website link. So the form that I'm putting on here, this was the one that was in the RSVP for this event. If you filled that out already, I've got your info. If you did not know about this form, did not fill out this form, and you want to participate in part 2, please do fill out this form, because this is how I will know to contact you. The long and short of when the follow-up is going to be, it's going to be after the annual meeting. I will send out probably about a week after the annual meeting. I'll send an email out to everybody that has filled out this form from this workshop and the in-person workshop at ISA. And what we'll do is we will match you with a mentor. That will be like a mutually agreed upon time. So we'll do like a matching, and then you and your mentor can figure out like what week works, like what date, time, and week works best for you to connect. So we try to make it kind of like maximally flexible, because we know that folks are located internationally. So, and then the second link I'm putting on here is just it's the link for the website inspo. I need to change the title for this. So these are, it's just a link of like websites for inspiration here. I should probably add like a few more on here. I haven't updated this since May, but so if you want to take a look at like, for example, websites that were built on GitHub, websites that were built in Squarespace, Weebly, Wix. So I sorted them by that. So you can see an example of like maybe some templates or styles for each of those. And then you can also see, you know, oh, here's like a very simple website. Like this person has, I think this is literally, this is it. They've got like their about page, like their CV, their contact. I've got like ones that are more creative, aesthetic, value, what I call values forward websites. So folks that are trying to communicate more like around their values and have that being the forward facing thing on their website. A lot of examples of people creating pages for like their projects or their labs, for example. They may not have a personal one for themselves, but they may want to have one for their like lab that they run. And then kind of like a collection of some others. Yep, I will make sure to email resources to folks. And I'm gonna send these to Sarah. I'll make sure I have like a little folder of stuff that Sarah can email out to all participants here.
Yeah, we will get that out for you, and once the recording is available, we'll share it with everybody so you can go back and refer to that as well. So, Devin, is there anything else you want to add before we?
Nope. I think that's it. I will throw my I'll throw my email address in the chat. If y'all have questions, please feel free to email. Like I mentioned, you know, we'll be doing this website a couple more times. There'll be the recording of it. I'll send some follow-up resources. Please feel free to, you know, let me know where you might need some additional resources, and we can work those in. And otherwise, you know, thank you everyone for registering, participating. It's really exciting to see this much interest in folks creating websites. There's a lot of stuff to think about and digest on this topic. You know, I appreciate everybody kind of participating here. So.
Well, thank you so much, Devin. Thank you everybody for coming today. I'm putting a link in the chat. It's a new mailing list that we have. If you sign up for it, you will find out about all of our upcoming events and programs, which are open to both members and non-members. Thank you for sharing that, Devin.
Yeah.
So please do feel free to sign up we have 7 more events coming up in February. So we have some good stuff. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Devin. And we will be in touch to share the materials from Devin and the recording as well.
Awesome.
Okay. All right. Okay. Bye, everybody.